Hello, everyone. This is so amazing. So many friendly faces in the chat. This just kind of just feels like we are almost in person. But welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming to see my session. But first, as we all know, we have to have a quick word from our sponsors, which this day would not be possible. It's an amazing day. So many amazing sessions. I've been dipping in and out of it. So thank you ever so much to all of these amazing sponsors. You really make this day possible, and I'm really privileged to be part of it. So, my name is Scott Durow, and like I say, thank you so much for coming. It's nice to see friendly faces. You know, when we're not doing these things in person, it's sometimes difficult to kind of feel like you're really connecting with people. So, so thank you for that. I've been involved with CRM right from the get-go, right from the earlier version, and I've been a MVP, Microsoft MVP since 2013, and I have been very privileged to see the Power Platform growing up over the years, all the way from CRM, moving into Dynamics 365, and then moving into the Power Platform and Power Apps. It's been an awesome journey. So yeah, I've also very recently moved from the UK to over into Canada. So let's put me up there so you can see me. Yeah, so this is a kind of a thing that's happened fairly recently during lockdown. So I'm now over in the west coast of Vancouver, and I've just been kind of starting to get used to how big this place is, because, like, you know, if you look at the relative sizes of the UK compared to Canada, UK really starts to look very, very tiny, but it is an amazing, amazing country. So if you are on the West Coast, then maybe we'll be meeting in person at some point in the future. So my session is about the Ribbon Workbench, and I've titled it Command Bar and Conquer. So we're going to be looking at the past of the Ribbon Workbench, which is a tool that I've built, and we're looking at the present, and then we're going to look at the future. To see where it's going. Now, I haven't really been talking about the Rim Workbench recently very much. It's one of those things that I did did a lot of sessions at the CRM UG in the UK, at London and Reading, and this was one of my sessions. And this session was actually about when we lost the ribbon. It turned into the command bar, and we were talking about the fact that it was still called the Ribbon Workbench. And then I did other sessions like this session, which is, I borrowed the name from. I did this with Sarah Critchley, where we kind of took it in turns to compete against each other to try and customize the command bar and see how quickly we could do it using the Ribbon Workbench. So it's one of those things that yeah, I haven't really been talking about it, because suddenly it became, the Ribbon Workbench was a tool that became just like a staple of everything. And in fact, it was a tool, I think it's one of the only tools that are part of the official Microsoft curriculum that is in the exams and things like that. So it just became just part of the thing that everyone was using, and I was using it as much myself. So the RibbonXml is really the final frontier of low code. And low code is this big thing now. It's a hot topic. Everyone's talking about it. So I thought it was time to take a bit of a retrospective and look at the Ribbon Workbench and where it sits with the low code paradigm, and really where is that going. So hence we're doing this session. You can quote me on that as well. So if you want to tweet me at any time during the session, I'm live. So I will try and if you put anything in the chat as well, I will try and reply to you as we go. It's great to see so many people chatting. So later on in this session, I do have an exclusive announcement, which I have been putting on Twitter as a little bit of a teaser. So do stick around, because it's very exciting. I'll be letting you in on the secret, as it were. So the past then. Let's do a quick history of the Ribbon Workbench. Does anyone remember this? This is the 2013 reimagined command bar. It went from the RibbonXml, the ribbon, over into this new command bar. I think it was Polaris update rollup 12 where we first saw it. if anyone remembers that. And we had this quick create, and then we had this sort of application bar thing coming down. Does anyone remember that? It was all a little bit confusing. No one really knew what to make of it, but it was we all kind of got used to it eventually. So if we go back all the way right to the early days, and actually, starting at CRM3, because early in CRM1, it did look very similar as well. So you've got like a horribly pixelated image here. Apologies like that, because evidently there was only like 16-bit graphics back in the day of CRM3. But we had this sort of toolbar, which looked, fairly typical of web applications at that time. Because remember, what web applications were trying to do was almost simulate a Windows native client applications. That's what web was trying to do. It's like, okay, well, let's pretend it's not HTML. Let's make it look like it's actual normal application. And then we moved into this rather snazzy jewel with some shading, and all started to look kind of fantastic. I remember first installing CRM4 and thinking, oh, wow, that looks cool. All very chrome. And actually that was being borrowed. That jewel was being borrowed from the Office jewel, and that's where it came from. So again, it was like trying to make CRM4 look like Office. So in a sense, it was no surprise when suddenly we had the ribbon appear in CRM 2011. And so the ribbon is one of these things that I think was an answer to the fact that certainly in Office, we started to have so many toolbar buttons. They were everywhere, and it was almost like you had to kind of navigate this hugely complex toolbar to try and find the ones that you wanted. And the idea about the ribbon was that it was trying to be more contextual, so show you the buttons that you needed when you were using a particular part of the application. So the tabs and which buttons appeared were dynamic based on where you were. And so CRM 2011 borrowed that ribbon concept and tried to make it, fairly contextual as well. And the other thing about the ribbon as well is depending on the size of screen you were on, different buttons would be bigger or smaller, and some would go into sort of like an overflow area. So it was quite a complicated beast. And so there was things like if you selected a subgrid, and I don't know if you remember this, you select a subgrid on a form, it would show you a different ribbon to if you were selecting the main form. Some people loved it, some people got a little bit confused by it, but nevertheless, it was there. And I think actually the code that they were using in CRM 2011 was indeed borrowed, probably lifted from the implementation of SharePoint. So there was already there was a bit of a connection between CRM 2011 and SharePoint at the time. And then suddenly, the Polaris and then CRM 2013 introduced this command bar. So we'd reimagined the user interface into the ribbon, and then, oh, look, we're back to a toolbar. So in a sense, the ribbon was kind of a bit of a flash in a pan. And suddenly we went back to this command bar. And then, of course, that's where we are today. And the ribbon today looks beautiful compared to what it used to, because we've got these SVGs, these scalable vector graphics, will make it look really lovely at all the different sizes, etc. So, we've come on a journey, and we're constantly going through this evolution. Who knows where it's going to go in the future? So, yes. Well, when that ribbon was first came out, it was one of those things that let's make myself a little bit smaller there. It looks like I'm about to be eaten by a Tyrannosaurus Rex there. But there was this dark ages when CRM 2011 was first released, when suddenly it was like we went from fairly simplistic, you had an ISV config and you could create your own custom buttons, suddenly to this hugely complicated RibbonXml. And the only way of doing it was you looked at the docs, and there was some documentation. It was this big schema, an XML, XSD schema, and it was like, okay, if I want to customize an existing button, I've even got to use an SDK message step to actually go and download the XML, and then I've got to go and edit it and then put it into my solution and then upload it as a zipped solution. Hugely complex. And it was a bit of a trial and error, to be honest. I spent many hours trying what worked, what didn't work, refreshing it, seeing the ribbon just disappear because there was an error, very, very complex. And so I was working on projects and we needed to create custom buttons, and it was taking just a disproportionate amount of time to do it. It was like, okay, well, we need to add a button to the form, so let's give a couple of days, maybe a week for that, so, which is crazy. So the idea really behind the Ribbon Workbench was like, okay, let's how can we simplify this? And it started off actually as a command line, a command line just to kind of automate the downloading of the Ribbon XML for a particular entity, and then editing it, and then uploading it. So yeah, it really was one of those things that was a tool of necessity for myself, removing the error-prone tasks of my own projects. And so then I decided, okay, let's put a bit of a user interface around it. And of course, the thing at the time was Silverlight. That was the big thing with CRM 2011, Silverlight, and it's this amazing user interface language we can run inside the browser, really super slick and super fast. And then just if you wanted to go and do something, you just do it in a kind of a web service way. You didn't have to have this request response type thing going on. And so yeah, it became one of those things that everyone started using, and I decided to use it, and it worked very well. I could create this complex user interface because I had to manage with the ribbon. What you have is you had these very different sort of ways of rendering the ribbon depending on how wide you were. So you had these tab scaling settings here, and so you could use the Ribbon Workbench to select these tab scaling. So if you've only used the Ribbon Workbench in the last few years, you won't have ever seen this kind of user interface there. But you had to be able to test it to say, well, what does my ribbon look like when I shrink it down and everything goes into the overflow. The Silverlight was quite a useful mechanism for doing that. But then the command bar moved over to it was in CRM 2011, and suddenly it was flattened. So I decided to we're still with Silverlight, so I had to make this an additional tab here to show command bar, and then we still have the old ribbon. Now the ribbon still is kind of there in some places, isn't it? Like Advanced Find, I think from a user interface perspective, is the last place that it's still the last bastion of the ribbon. But that's going to be going away soon. It's still in there in the classic Solution Explorer, which we all love secretly. But nevertheless, what I had to do is I had to work out how was the ribbon being flattened down into these single line command bars. But then Silverlight had a unfortunate demise. So I just loved Silverlight. I really did. And I was really saddened when it moved on. But, if you're in IT, one of the things is change is absolutely inevitable. You can't resist it, right? So I decided to throw everything out of all Silverlight. I didn't want to hang on to it. So I rewrote the whole of the Ribbon Workbench using HTML. And actually, it was rewritten using Sparkle XRM, which is a kind of an HTML user interface framework that I did for making it easy to build these kind of interfaces. And so, yeah, it worked out quite well. And I actually found that I could harvest a lot of the code because I'd written the Ribbon Workbench in a very kind of MVVM pattern. So the view model was separate to the view, to the way in which it was rendered. So actually, I took a lot of the code from the old Silverlight version and just sort of lifted it and put it into a plugin. And then just changed the Silverlight user interface, which was all written in XAML, to just doing HTML, and it worked. So it was actually a lot easier than I was expecting it to be. So we are now actually getting to the 10-year anniversary of the Rim Workbench, which literally blows my mind. I really can't believe it's been that length of time. And over that time, I've actually only been collecting stats for like the last 5 years or so. But I did some pull on the stats. There's 4.5 million opens of the Ribbon Workbench, and then 353,000 unique users in that last 5 years. So I feel so privileged to have so much support. People have been using the beta, so thank you if you've ever used the beta and reported any issues. They've sent bug reports, helped me diagnose issues. People have even said, hey, can you here's the credentials, can you just hop onto my system and see what's going on and try and work it out? So thank you ever so much everyone who's helped out over those years with the development of the Ribbon Workbench. You know who you are, and so yeah, fantastic stuff. And yeah, I've been privileged to be part of that journey, really, to all the way from those early days to where we are, that brings us to the present. So you see what I did there? A bit of a segue. So quick recap then, really, on where we are now. I suppose there may be some people in listening to here that really only just come on into using the Ribbon Workbench recently, or maybe you've never used the Ribbon Workbench. But one of the things that people quite often ask is, well, what does the Ribbon Workbench do? Okay, because I haven't really talked about that, considering this is a session about the Ribbon Workbench. So the Rim Workbench edits the command bar. So this is a standard form where we are in the UCI. And this top area here, the green, that's probably the most common place that people use the Rim Workbench to edit. So I can edit existing buttons, I can add new buttons, or I can hide buttons. I can kind of customize it, do lots of different things. The business process flow, that is not a ribbon. And it quite often gets called the ribbon by some people because it kind of does look a bit like it, but that's not, you don't use the Ribbon Workbench to customize that, nor do you use it to customize the left-hand side, this sitemap, because this is effectively the same thing as, remember when I showed that pull down from the CRM 2013 days, that's the sitemap, and the Ribbon Workbench doesn't edit that. You edit that using the app sitemap. There is also this top bar across the and it's referred to the Office 365 bar these days, I think. So the stuff on the left is not customizable by the Ribbon Workbench. It's fairly uncustomizable, really. But the stuff on the right is partially customizable. So you've got these sort of out-of-the-box buttons like my profile, my help, my settings, and those kind of things are fixed. But then you start to, as you further on the left, you start to go to areas where you can do some degree of customization, but you can also add your own buttons in there, which is one of those things that not many people do these days, but you can if you want to. And indeed, that's how the first-party apps are starting to add things in. So they can add buttons at the top bar. You have some components on a form, like the timeline control here. We've got this that looks like a command bar. It looks like it, but it's not actually a command bar. So you can't edit that using the Rim Workbench. You can customize it using the timeline control dials and knobs, but you can't actually use the Rim Workbench to do it. But when you go over to a grid, a subgrid on a form, you do have a command bar on the subgrid, which you can customize using the Rim Workbench. So I can add my own buttons, etc. here. So, and then indeed, when you go into like a home page grid, so here I've selected opportunities from the sitemap, and I get a command bar that looks kind of similar to a command bar on a form, except for what I'm doing here is I'm applying buttons and actions to a whole load of records or a single record that I've selected. So yeah, you can use the Ribbon Workbench to customize that. I couldn't really talk about the Ribbon Workbench without talking about managed and unmanaged, but I'm not going to go into the whole debate because I know that this debate is like an ongoing, it bubbles away for a little while and then it comes up and everyone starts saying, oh, managed, no, unmanaged, managed, no, unmanaged. In fact, actually, there was this, I searched for a picture of some punching. I should have actually, maybe I could have put a picture of the punch out between the Click Dimensions and Dynamics Marketing earlier, but I found fruit punches, so I put those. It's making me a bit thirsty actually. But the point is that when you are customizing the ribbon in Ribbon Workbench, you are always making unmanaged customization. So in a sense, the argument really is nothing to do with Ribbon Workbench. How you deploy those customizations really is nothing to do with it. You are always making customizations in the unmanaged layer. You can't take a managed button and make changes in the managed layer. It's always going to add another layer on top of it. And that's really the key here, because we've got these the core entity ribbon and the core application ribbon. They're sort of right down at the system, the platform level that gives us things like the save button and the edit button, the delete and the activate button and all of that kind of stuff. It's then the job of the first party apps to kind of add additional buttons on top of it, and that's the managed layer. And then that's where you come in, and you can then start to add your own customizations on top of that at the unmanaged. When you deploy that, the the recommendation from Microsoft obviously is you deploy that as a managed solution, but really that's down to you how you do that. But I think this layering is probably one of the things that it adds the most complexity to the RibbonXml. And when you're using the Rim Workbench, it tries to sort of remove you from that. All you need to remember is that you're adding unmanaged customizations into your solution. So where we are today actually is we moved on from originally the Rim Workbench was only deployed as a solution. So, you download the solution, zip, and you'd import it into Dynamics, and then you'd use it from the solution manager. It'd be a button there. And that was the only way. But then this amazing tool came along, the XRM Toolbox, which had the ability to put plugins and such a rich ecosystem, so many people creating amazing plugins. And so, I thought, well, I really need to be able to put the Rim Workbench there because it gives people choice. So the advantage of using the solution and installing the solution into CRM is that it's kind of cross-platform. So it works on the Mac. And this is what a big thing. And I'm quite proud of the fact that it is cross-platform. A lot of people do use the Mac. And they use the Ribbon Workbench on the Mac to change their ribbon. It works for all users, so you can install it once, and you may have a team of people. They can all be using it in a sort of a more of a functional way. If they don't have permissions to install stuff locally. But then, of course, if you're using the XRM Toolbox already, it's a very convenient place. You can have multiple connections in the XRM Toolbox. And you can just switch between, if you're working on multiple different customers instances, it's very easy just to switch your connections. And also the XRM Toolbox has kind of got this nice plug-in auto update mechanism. So there's benefits to both sides, but it's all about choice, right? So I wanted to give everyone some choice. So the import process is one of those things that is probably the thing that causes people the most grief with the Rim Workbench, because one of the things that it has to do, and this is exactly the same if you're doing this manually, okay? So the Rim Workbench originally, as I said, it used to be a command line tool. And so you would use this command line tool to perform this kind of complicated set of steps in a repeatable way. So firstly, what you've got to do is you've got to export the solution. Okay, so you've got to get a solution XML with the RibbonXml inside all the entity customizations. You unzip that, and that gives you these XML files. And then I need to go and update these XML files inside the entity XML. And part of that, I might need to go and download, use another SDK step to go and download the XML for a particular entity button that I want to customize, because it's about adding layers on top of it. So once you've done that, you then have to rezip that, and then you've got to go and do that import solution, and then you've got to do and publish. So already, just completely ignoring the fact that you've got XSD validations going on, you've got to worry about the IDs and how you relate all the different components in that XML together. It's already quite a laborious process, hence why I made that command line tool. And one of the things that people quite often get frustrated on is, will it ever finish importing? And if you've used the Rim Workbench, you're probably familiar with just sort of sitting there waiting, maybe seeing my face in the top right hand corner, and wondering what on earth is it actually doing? And so hopefully that kind of gives you a bit of a kind of insight into why it takes so long. Now, I am constantly trying to improve this speed of importing, because it is this thing that we want. If we're trying to save time, right? So we want to make it as quick as possible. And there have been some improvements to the export of a solution. And the way that you export a solution previously using the SDKs, it was like a synchronous process. But I don't know if anyone's used the Power Apps, the Power Platform build tools for Azure DevOps and Git actions. Notice there's like an ability to export a solution asynchronously. That hasn't been publicized yet in the docs, so it's not publicly available, but certainly as it's supported, I'm going to use that. And I hope that will make it a little bit quicker to export, and certainly we'll avoid the timeouts, because I have noticed that the export of the solution, for some reason, especially on trials, has been taking a lot longer recently. So you may have experienced a timeout when you're exporting that solution. So If you do have a timeout, just try it again. It will probably work the second time. Equally, importing and publishing. Again, sometimes you get a timeout there, and I've been working on some improvements there. One of the things you may have noticed if you've been doing stuff recently is this dialogue. I don't know if anyone's seen this. And so what I've done is actually in a recent update, I've made it so that you can only download solutions into the Ribbon Workbench that contain just the shell of an entity. Does that make any sense? So it's basically the top level entity with no attributes, forms, views, any workflows or flows or apps, anything like that. Just literally the entity itself. So that speeds up that export process, and also it speeds up the import process. And so it won't let you now download, because although their best practice was there and I documented it, people were still exporting their solutions that contain a whole ton of stuff, and that was just being a lot slower than it needed to. So if you got frustrated by this dialogue, apologies there, but really it is for your own good. So just like a medicine for your own good. So let's talk about Canvas apps then, because I started off the session talking about the low code movement, and I've really been so excited by low code, and certainly it offers so many opportunities for speeding up development and lowering your total cost of ownership. So Canvas apps are the figurehead of low code, if you like, along with Power Automate Flows. And some people say, well, how does the Ribbon Workbench work with Canvas apps? And the key thing about the Ribbon Workbench and in Canvas apps is that it really is something that, they have the Canvas apps have no command bar. So it's just, you can do what you like this picture. You can just, in fact, I've seen some Power apps that kind of look like that, actually, a bit of a mess, but that's the point, right? You can do what you like, any kind of colors you want, anything goes. And so model-driven apps is where command bar sits. It's very semantically driven. It's very driven by the metadata. And now if you've ever tried to build something like the model-driven app inside a Canvas app, you'll know how much you get from a model-driven app just off from the gate. You get all your sitemap, you get your forms, you get your save load cycle, editing in grids, all of that kind of stuff. None of that happens in Canvas app, but that's the point. You can do what you like. But nevertheless, there is this convergence. Canvas apps and model-driven apps, I kind of seeing the two things getting so close together. So we can embed Canvas apps inside model-driven apps. We can, with the new functionality that's coming out with screens, we can actually have Canvas apps that look much more like natively part of a model-driven app. So in a sense, at some point, really, the command bar will be able to be used alongside Canvas apps in tandem, because the two types of apps really are going to be stuck together and sort of, part of the same type of app model. So, the legacy of the Ribbon. Let's just go over into the Ribbon Workbench and kind of just show you what I mean by the legacy of the Ribbon. Because where we are today is that we've had this RibbonXml, and it's now effectively hidden. Yeah, so this is the Ribbon Workbench here, and you can see that what we've got is if we highlight some of these places, down on the bottom right here, it says group. Okay, and you've got an ID here. This is a home page, grid, contact, main. And actually, this is part of the XML. And if I started to customize this stuff, I'd see it in the XML. But as far as the user interface is concerned, it's kind of hidden. In fact, if you look here, you can see these little subgroups, these areas here. And this was part of the way in which the templates worked in the Ribbon. So in the latest Ribbon Workbench, I'm just trying to hide all of that stuff. So I can try and drag a button and put it into one of these groups, but it really is trying to hide the fact that there's some complexity going on there. And indeed, if you ever see anything in the ISV, you might, this template section here, that actually might be a button that's been upgraded from CRM4, because when CRM4 moved over to the RibbonXml, anything that was in the ISV config ended up in this little template section here. So we've got this huge legacy, and it's kind of a bit of baggage, really. And I think that's the point about where we're moving, is we moving in a direction of that we want to get to this low code paradigm. We want to have as much functionality that's available without going and worrying about the complexities. It's you're just defining the functionality you want by configuring it and not having to worry about what's going on under the covers. The ethos of the Rim Workbench has always been trying to isolate people from the complexities of the RibbonXml. That's really the point of it. But there's only so far I can go. And now, this time last year, we talked about the pro code, no code unite, the hashtag that I did with Sarah Lagerwitz, and we had this kind of mock fight going between code and no code. But the point is that we were trying to say that the great thing about the Power Platform is that you can use code and you can use no code and low code, and they all work together, and there's this no cliffs paradigm. So, you know, if I get so far and I find that I do need to do something, I can jump into code and I can create a component and share that with low coders. So this paradigm of working in low code is really why I was talking about the fact that the RibbonXml is this final frontier of low code. Now, I tried to create as much as I can, as I can do in the Ribbon Workbench to make it as low code as possible. So for example, if I create a command here, I can say, right, add an action. Okay, I've got URL action or JavaScript action. URL, I'm going to open up a web page. Okay, not many people are going to be doing that. I don't know how many people use that. But most of the time, you're very quickly into writing code. It's like JavaScript action. Okay, I've got to write some code. So, you're already out of the low code. Now, if you move over into, if I say, for example, take and add a display rule, then we've got a little bit more low codey kind of options here. We've got the ability to vary a display of a button by using entity privilege rule. So I can kind of give it an entity and I can give it a privilege depth, and I can say, okay, well, it's only show this button there if they've got right privileges to the account entity or something like that. So, this is fairly low code, but there is still this intrinsic link about the fact that you've got to know what's going on, and especially the fact that actually this is a display rule, but you've also got enable rules. So what's the difference between an enable rule and a display rule? And that's the legacy of that RibbonXml. It's there in the background, and you may not necessarily it may not make sense, because if you add an enable rule, it doesn't disable it, it hides it now. So we still got this baggage that we're bringing now. So the SmartButtons is SmartButtons was a solution where I thought, okay, the actual Ribbon Workbench natively using the RibbonXml can only get you so far in that low code paradigm. So I said, okay, let's see, how can I make it easier to make low code? So I can, for example, do something like, okay, open a dialog or run a report or run a workflow. So for example, if I drag this open dialog on here, I can give it a title. I can copy a URL from a Canvas app to open it. So it's starting to make it a little bit easier. So, the way that would work is I'd go into one of my accounts, and then I can click on a create invoice button, and the Ribbon Workbench is sort of orchestrating that. So it's creating a Canvas app and it's just opening up in a dialog. Equally, we can do things like, run a webhook to run a flow to make it easy from a button. There's also this quick.js, which one of the things that as soon as you're into JavaScript and running a JavaScript web resources, you've got to create a web resource, you've got to upload that, you've got to manage all the dependencies. So I thought, well, quick.js, actually writing some simple JavaScript, you might copy and paste it from some forums or something like that. It could be quite straightforward to do. So like if I go to the account entity where I've done one of this, you can see here that I've got the save and submit button here. And so when you add a smart button, you can then edit your smart button properties at the top here, as well as any of the standard RibbonXml under the bottom here. So you can see here that this is save and submit, setting an attribute on the form, and then it's doing a save and close, and it's using the context it's like set up automatically for us. So it's kind of less code. It's not necessarily low code, but it's certainly making it easier to do these things. And so the thing about SmartButtons is that I kind of figured, well, it's just like a templating mechanism. And actually, this is a lesser known thing that actually you can make your own smart buttons if you wanted to. I haven't really publicized it very much, but the smart button solution is just like a manifest XML. So, if I take one of these buttons, like create invoice, and if I do a copy like this, what it does, if you look at the clipboard here, it actually creates like a kind of a JSON version of that button. And the manifest file for smart buttons is just basically this kind of loaded JSON. And what happens is when the Ribbon Workbench loads, it goes and looks at your environment that you've just loaded the solution from and goes and tries to find any solutions with a smart button manifest. And then those smart button manifests will appear inside the smart button. So actually, if you wanted to, you could create your own smart button solutions and publish it. So if you fancy doing that, let me know, because I can kind of show you how that works. If you want to find out how it works, actually, you could just go to the GitHub repository for smart buttons and just look at the actual the manifest file. But basically, what you do is you just copy a button inside the Ribbon Workbench. You can take the JSON here, and you can just substitute out the various different properties that appear in the right-hand panel. So yeah, see Daniel's talking about JSON, not YAML. Yes, I didn't choose. I know how you love YAML, Daniel. Right? Yeah, we all love YAML. Really we do. But yes, it's JSON that kind of works quite nicely in the JavaScript environment. So this is getting us some of that way in that low code. And so you can do things like renaming icons, renaming buttons, making different icons, dragging them around, controlling the visibility, using low code, copying and pasting JavaScript from Stack Overflow to kind of do various things. And so, these are all low code things. But the thing about the smart buttons, and this is really important, is that you do need to install the smart buttons solution in your target environment. If you're using the Ribbon Workbench normally, just natively, without smart buttons, you don't need to run the Ribbon Workbench in production. In fact, this is just my recommendation. Never use the Ribbon Workbench against a production environment. Okay, folks? Just do not do that. Always do it in a development environment, export the entity and import it into your production. Never use the Rim Workbench against production, right? Okay, I've said it, I'm not going to say it again. Smart buttons, if you make a change to your Ribbon using smart buttons in development, before you deploy your smart button customizations, you will also need to deploy the smart button solution, because I have to create a little bit of code that those smart buttons are using, and so really the Ribbon Workbench is not low code, it's less code. I think that's the key, so where is all this going, right? Because you can see I'm segueing into the future. We've covered the past, where it's come from, the 8-bit graphics of CRM3, well, in my screenshot anyway, into the future, and this final frontier. I missed an opportunity. I could put a Star Trek image up here, shouldn't I? Maybe Picard or Kirk or someone. But the final frontier of low code is this RibbonXml. We're getting low code so many different places elsewhere. So what if I told you, drum roll please, what if I told you that you will be able to use the solution editor natively inside the Power Platform and go and create a Canvas app style expression and put it into a button and have that appear in your command bar? Wouldn't that be amazing? Because this is exclusive, so this has never been announced publicly before. Microsoft are now working on command bar version 2. And the team have been very privileged. They've given me permission to announce this and talk about what their plans are. And I'm really super excited for this, because the whole ethos of the Ribbon Workbench has been moving in this direction. So this is like the natural conclusion. It's what they're not doing is they're not making their own version of the Ribbon Workbench. Okay, that is not what they're doing. Okay, they're not saying, okay, the Rim Workbench does this, so we're going to do it like this. They're reinventing commanding, making a completely different infrastructure that can use all of that good stuff that you get in Canvas app expressions, Power Apps Canvas app expressions, and so that we can now use that inside our model-driven apps. And so it's going to really bring those two sides, and I was talking about that convergence with the messy picture, bringing those two things converging. It's like the natural conclusion of convergence. So it's going to be previewing later this year. I can't show you any screenshots or anything because it's still very much it's in its early days, and I don't know that much about it. I know limited details, but it's been targeted to preview later this year. No commitments about dates, etc. But it's going to have a visual designer support. So like the Ribbon Workbench, like you'd be able to kind of actually visually see what you're building. And I think that's the really cool thing here, right? And have this formula for visibility and actions like you do in Canvas apps. Now, what's really exciting is the fact that we'll still have JavaScript support. And this goes back to this pro code, no code unite, this no cliffs. Like, I can get this far if we're using my low code expressions. And if suddenly I find that actually I can't do something for whatever reason because there's a limitation in that expression language, I can still go back into JavaScript support. And there's going to be better ALM support, so it's going to be like a part of the solution rather than just this RibbonXml thing that's sort of bundled up inside entities. Because at the moment, there's no way of excluding the RibbonXml if you deploy an entity. If you deploy an entity, it's always going to contain your RibbonXml, which is frustrating. But so we're going to actually see this as much more as a key part of the solution. Also app level command bar support. This is a common ask, and there's ways of doing this, hacks of JavaScript that you can kind of check the app ID and hide and show buttons depending on the app, but it's going to be natively. And so what we're going to see is this like version 1 and version 2 side by side. So there's going to be no, it's not going to be one day they're going to be announcements to say, right, by this time you've got to have to move all of your stuff, your RibbonXml, over into version 2. It's going to be side by side. If you think about it, that's really the only way it's going to work, because you're still going to have legacy stuff. You're going to still have ISVs, even first party apps and things like that are going to be going to have the legacy, that the classic probably it will be called XML. And so, but if you edit a V1, a classic, inside the command bar, then what it'll do is it'll upgrade it to V2. And so then you can sort of go and edit it in V2. So it's kind of like an automatic upgrade to V2, and then you can go and change it. Now, if you want to, you can always go back to the V1, because the RibbonXml is always going to be there. And I think this is a really key priority for them, to make sure that it's not going to be disruptive to people. It's not going to be one of these things that suddenly you've upgraded something and it's broken loads of things. You've always got that fallback. So, the Ribbon Workbench is going to be working in side-by-side, effectively, mode with commanding version 2. You can imagine, it become like the classic Ribbon Workbench or something. But, you still use the Rim Workbench, right? The Ribbon Workbench is not dead, okay? This is the thing, because I can just imagine the tweets, and if anyone tweets, the Ribbon Workbench is dead. Rim Workbench is absolutely not dead for the moment. Because you're going to still have to use the Ribbon Workbench to perform actions that are not supported in V2. Things that you may initially, it's probably going to be a journey like all these things. It's not first party commands that are in the first party app, the dynamic sales, marketing. They eventually they'll be migrated, I expect. But if you still want to customize them, you're going to still have to use Ribbon Workbench to do that. Legacy command stuff that you've got in your solution that you don't want to upgrade yet, you can still. But then you've also got on-premise, of course, because people still are deployed on-premise, and a lot of people use the Rim Workbench for on-premise as well. So the Rim Workbench, I'll say it again, is not dead yet. Personally, I'm so excited about this move, because it really shows the commitment that the team are putting into this low code paradigm. And it really goes back, it's the fact that a year ago, when we were in person and in Scottish Summit, when Sarah and I introduced the hashtag ProCode No Code Unite, we're a year on, and this is exactly in alignment with that. It's really going to be able to give us all of the benefits that we get from other parts of the platform inside the command bar. So I hope you feel kind of encouraged by that as well. And I'm certainly going to be, follow me on Twitter, because I am going to be putting tons of content out there as soon as it's all public, and I'll be showing you how to use the new commanding to do various different things. And the future really is bright. So that's me at time. So questions, I've been kind of keeping a bit of a view on the chat here, but if anyone oh dear, people are putting some interesting interesting comments in here about suggesting the names for it. But if anyone wants to ask a question, then put it in the chat and I will give it a go at asking. But absolutely, please do tweet about this, and obviously the recording of the session will be available. Matt's going to be putting it up as well, so people will be able to refer back to it. And perhaps in Scottish Summit 2022, perhaps I'll be doing a session and showing off the commanding v2 and all the cool stuff. But you certainly don't worry, I'm continuing to support the Ribbon Workbench, and I'm continuing to develop the smart buttons alongside that as well. So what have we got? Any questions here? No, everyone is super excited. Thanks ever so much for everyone for coming. I'll kind of stay around a bit and answer the questions in chat. But other than that, have a great day, and hopefully you'll see some of you at the pub quiz, which I'm really excited about. So thanks ever so much for coming. Take care.